Hi there, John the Handyman, and as you can see, I am not in a workshop. I'm in my kitchen. And it's January, and that means in the shops you'll find Seville oranges. But they won't be there for very long, a couple of weeks, and that's it, and they're done. And Seville oranges, if you don't know, are used to make orange marmalade. And it's something I've been making for the last 20 years, and I have to say it's delicious. But let me go right back to the beginning. Let's sit down at the dining room table where I've got all the ingredients, and I'll tell you how we go about it. I'm going to be using my mum's recipe. It's all in imperial, so you can either convert it to kilos if you want or leave it as it is. So you want 2 pounds of Seville oranges, 2 pints of water, 1 lemon. I generally put in 2, and if you can get unwaxed lemons, that's probably a good thing to buy. I don't really know what the wax does to the surface of these, but unwaxed sounds like the sensible way to go. And finally, 4 pounds of granulated sugar or preserving sugar. I generally use just ordinary household granulated sugar. Preserving sugar I think costs a little bit more, but I believe it has some pectin in it which will help it set. You're going to need a couple of cutting boards to chop up the fruit, a pan to put the fruit in once you've cut it. Now I'm going to be using my pressure cooker, a nice big sharp knife for cutting up the fruit. You might want a smaller one, not sure whether I'll bother using that. And I've got a little tiny bladed knife here with a point on the end, and that's really helpful when you're trying to dig out the pips, because you want to take all the pips out of the fruit if you can. The pips will go into a bowl, well actually they'll go into a muslin bag. Now I think this is nylon. It's obviously been used for fruit, I can tell by the dark staining. Again, it was Mum's. But it's very, very fine texture. I can see the camera through that. And the pips go in here, into the pressure cooker. So hopefully the pectin inside will come out of the pips and you'll be able to squeeze it through the bag. I think that's the idea. You're going to need some scales for weighing the fruit and a bowl to put the fruit in on top of the scales. And that's about all you need for the time being. So the first job is to take all this lot over to the sink and give it a wash. Right, I've washed everything and I've weighed out enough fruit for one batch. And these oranges weigh 2 pounds 5 ounces. I'm going to add 2 large lemons, and they're another 15 ounces. So the first thing to do is to cut these up. Get yourself a nice sharp knife and begin chopping. I usually cut them in half and then in half again. Now you want the pips, so this is where your bowl with the bit of muslin comes in. If you haven't got muslin, you could probably use, I think I've used an old handkerchief in the past now, a clean one. I just pick out the pips. So make sure you've got all those pips out of there. Once you've done all, I'll come back to those in a minute, you can then put these straight in the pan. So we do exactly the same thing with the lemons. It's inevitable that a few pips will find their way into the pot, but that really doesn't matter. So carry on cutting up your fruit, take the pips out, keep those, and then pop the fruit into your pan that you're going to be doing the cooking in. Oh, ideally, it's a good idea to actually squeeze the fruit out as you go. It'll help later because when you come to fish this lot out, it'll be very, very hot. So it's good to have the juice squeezed out in advance. That's all the oranges and the lemons in the pan waiting to go on the hob. Now I've got to somehow get the bag out of here. You want that juice, look, 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 look. Can you see that? Juice going in. And the pips. With the fruit and the pips in here, it's time to take it over onto the hob. Right, with the fruit and everything in the pan, it's time to put in, let me check, 2 pints of water. Oh, just about. Right, at this point, before we turn the heat on under this, there's another little job that we can do, and that is to weigh out the sugar. We need 4 pounds of granulated sugar. Now, this is not going to go in the fruit just yet. I'm putting it into this large tray, which is going to go in the oven. Right, that's 4 pounds of sugar. Now I'm just going to pop this in the oven to warm up. So we can put the oven on. Let's try 120 centigrade. I'll just pop this in. Now we can put the light on underneath the fruit. Since this is a pressure cooker, I'm putting a pressure cooker lid on it. I'll work out which way around it goes. That's better. Okay, so the lid is on, and I can turn the pressure gauge up to 2 because I want it to be at maximum pressure. Now, I've just got to sit and wait for that to come up to the boil. This is the time now to sort out my jars and then cut the paper lids that go on the inside, the greaseproof paper. So I've got 2 large jars, 7 smaller ones. Normally I would say give these a good wash, but I know they've been washed previously, so I'm not going to bother washing them again. I wash them, make sure they're dry, put them away with the lids on. Put the lids on one side, and then we're going to cut some greaseproof paper lids that will just sit in the top of here, on the top of the marmalade. I'm not sure that greaseproof paper is really essential. I know these always, well, usually seal completely airtight. As I say, I'm not really sure that greaseproof paper is absolutely essential. Draw around in pencil and then just cut them, if you can, to the inside of the pencil line. So I'm going to carry on cutting these, and I'll come back to you once this has reached its pressure and come to the boil. This is now steaming away nicely, so I'm going to give that about 10 minutes. It's under pressure. I think 10 minutes will be sufficient. A little job you can be doing while you're waiting for that is to put a saucer or a small plate in the fridge. You need the cold plate so you can test the setting point of the marmalade. So I've already done that. There's a small plate already in there. Well, this has now had at least a quarter of an hour, and I've depressurized it over at the sink by sticking it in some cold water and gently letting the pressure out. So with a bit of luck, this fruit should be nice and soft, which it is. That is going to be perfect. Falling off this fork really nicely, so that's going to be great. As I said, if you don't have a pressure cooker, you'd have to use a big pot. Now, my mum used to use this. I think they're known as coppers. And it's quite a size. It's a jam making pot, saucepan. And I noticed, just out of interest, on the back of the bag that had the Seville oranges in, it says if you're putting this into a large saucepan, you've got to simmer it gently, uncovered, for 2 to 2.5 hours until the orange rind is soft. Well, 2 to 2.5 hours, that's a long time. If you've got a pressure cooker or can borrow one, probably a really good idea. So it's back to the table where I can sit down and we'll chop this lot up. But first, you've got to deal with the bag of pips, which is hot and sticky. I'm just squeezing out a little tiny bit of juice onto the side of the pan. I'm going to come back to this later, but for the time being I'm going to put it in this bowl, but you'll see what I'm going to do this a little bit later on when we get back to the hob. We've got to start cutting this lot up, so I tend to use this fork, as you can see here, and what you want to do is to cut these into strips, cut them across. These are very good. You'll probably find that you can do a couple of these together. Basically, you just want to cut them all up into little pieces. And if you feel that what you've done is a little bit on the thick side, just mash it up. I tend to cut the lemons quite small because there's only 2 lemons for the entire batch. If you like it a little bit more tangy, then put in a 3rd lemon. If you find you're running out of space on your cutting board, put everything into a bowl temporarily. With everything chopped, it's time to put it all back in the pot. That's the juice that's in there, which is excellent. So carefully, now we can go back to the hob and we can boil that up. Now I'm just boiling up some water here. I have to put another pint of water into this, so I might as well make it hot. it'll just be that much quicker. Now we come back to the bag of the pips. What I like to do is to stick them in the water and just kind of dump them around a bit. What I'm trying to do is to get the pectin out of the bag. I'm just going to, with a wooden spoon, give this a bit of a stir around, see if I can encourage any of the orange juice and the pectin to come out into that water. Pop it in the bowl. What I'm going to try and do is to turn this bag inside out. So this is horribly messy. Dump that back in the water. So if there's any nice juice and pectin stuck to the side, it'll wash off into that water and then it can go straight into there. Now this is the point where I should have said, this is where you put the oven on to warm up the sugar. Of course I did that about 2 hours ago now, but I did turn the oven off about an hour and a half ago. So let's do that. Let's put the oven back on. I'll set it for 110 centigrade. I think that will be plenty warm enough. Okay, let's put the light under this. It's looking nice. That's enough faffing around with this bag. And tip this pint of water in. Now I've just got to wait for this to come up to the boil. It's going to take a little while, I think. This is getting there. Just giving it a stir so it doesn't burn on the bottom. I think we can get the sugar out. Here's the tricky part now. I've got to get all the sugar into here without tipping it all over the hob. So I'm going to start just by spooning it in. It's important to stir this sugar until it's dissolved, otherwise it will stick to the bottom and it will burn. Right, must keep stirring. And I can feel the sugar's definitely dissolved. Now I have to wait for that to come up to a boil. And there should be a nice, what they call a rolling boil. So I think you'll see it appears to be rolling inside. It's just moving gently. Not too vigorously, but not slowly. Now you need to boil this probably for at least 20 minutes, maybe half an hour, until it reaches a setting point. Now there's a couple of ways you can use a thermometer, so we can pop that in, you can try that. But the time-honoured way of seeing is after about 20 minutes, to test if you've reached the setting point, you take a little teaspoon, take a little bit out, put it on your cold saucer, which is in your fridge, and then pop it back in the fridge for 5 minutes or so, and see what happens to it. The top of the marmalade should form a little skin on it. If you push it with your finger, it should form a skin, and that generally signifies that you've reached the setting point, and then you can switch this off and think about bottling it. What I'm going to do today, I've got a packet here of pectin. You can buy this in sachets, or you can actually buy little bottles of liquid pectin. So I'm going to put one of these in as well, give me a bit of a helping hand. So a lot of this pectin is turned into lumps, which is a bit of a pain. I'm going to have to somehow squash the pectin against the side, but the lumps seem to be disappearing, which is good news. Disaster averted. So let's turn this up so it's got a rolling boil. Okay, well this is just boiling nicely, so what I can do now, because the oven's hot, I want to put my jam jars in the oven to warm up. So let's set a timer for 20 minutes and we'll just let this do its thing and come back and test it. Well, I think that's what they call a rolling boil. Now if you get any scum, and there's maybe just a little bit here around the edge, you can just spoon it off, get rid of that. But there is very, very little, so I'm not too worried. How's our jam thermometer doing? I was looking at the wrong part of it earlier. At the bottom it says fruit bottling, but a bit higher up it actually says jam. Needs to be reading about 104 centigrade and 220 Fahrenheit. So in theory, once it reaches that temperature, you're ready to try a little bit of it in the fridge and see if it sets. Well, this has been boiling for a good 20 minutes and it appears to have reached the right temperature on here. So I put a little bit in the fridge on a saucer. I've now turned this off and I'm going to just let this sit, and I'll give a little sample that's in the fridge 5 or 10 minutes. Apparently you're supposed to just let the marmalade sit here and let it rest for 10 or 15 minutes, so I shall do that. Well, I think we're about ready to see if this little sample of marmalade is beginning to form a skin, and that is good. The top of it is, it's not sliding off the plate, so I think that's quite good. Oh, it tastes lovely. So I'm going to try bottling this now. They are very hot now. Well, in order to get the jam, the marmalade rather, from here into these jars, I think what I'm going to use is a jug. And I've got a nice funnel, very wide at the top, with a large hole at the bottom, which will very conveniently sit nicely on top of the jar. You really want to scoop this out. You don't want to be lifting this up and tipping it in, because it's far too heavy and it's far too hot, and the chances are you'll have a nasty accident. So now it's just a question of filling jars. When it comes to the last of the marmalade, you will definitely have to pick this up and tip it very gently. And that is the marmalade in the jars. So the next thing to do is to put on these little paper tops. Just push them on. So the paper lids are on. Just a question of putting the tops on now. And I'll tighten them as we go. These are particularly hot, so just be careful you don't drop one. Well, I hope you enjoy this video. It's a little bit different to my normal woodworking ones. Please share it with friends, anyone who might be wanting to make marmalade. And give it a thumbs up, and I will see you on my next video. Bye for now.